World leaders have begun to gather in Osaka, Japan ahead of the G20 summit that will kick off tomorrow. Issues such as trade, climate action and security are on the table during the two-day gathering.
However, all eyes will be on whether the U.S. and China will strike a deal on the sidelines of the summit to end their long-running trade war. The U.S. and Chinese presidents are set to meet on Saturday, and it will be their first face-to-face meeting since December at the last G20, and that was in Argentina. Since then, their tariff exchanges have escalated significantly. For more, let's cross over to Michio Ishida in Osaka. Michio, Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe and Chinese President Xi Jinping, they're sitting down for talks this evening, and then he will be meeting U.S. President Donald Trump first thing in the morning. Will Mr. Abe, as the summit's host, try to play mediator between the two powers?
Well, that's the question that was actually posed to the Japanese government spokesperson. And he said that Japan does not want to call Mr. Abe's role as that of a mediator. Now, he did not specify, but perhaps, looking back, Mr. Abe was in Iran earlier this month, and the whole world saw him as a mediator between Iran and the U.S. But the whole purpose was, to lower the tension between U.S. and Iran, but that didn't happen. Actually, tension is quite high at this point in time. So perhaps that is the reason why that the Japanese government does not want to use the word mediator. However, the government is indeed concerned about the relationship between the U.S. and China in terms of trade, because the trade war is in fact impacting Japan. Those two nations are the world's biggest economies. Japan is the third largest economy, and Japanese for instance, exports to China is being impacted because Japanese component makers export their components to China, and they are assembled and exported from China to the U.S. And with this tariff war, it's a big impact on Japanese companies. However, one thing that I should mention is that critics think that Japan is in perhaps a pretty good position to play the role of a mediator between the U.S. and China, because Japan's relationship with China has been improving lately since the visit of its premier to Japan last May, and Mr. Abe's visit to China in October also last year. This is one thing. Another is that, as we all know, Mr. Abe and Mr. Trump are very close. They met 3 months in a row. They play tennis. They play golf often. They watch sumo together. And I actually talked to an analyst. It is Dean Naoyuki Yoshino of the Asia Development Bank Institute, and here's his perspective of the China-U.S. trade war.
I think G20 this time is very important because there are some uncertainty about U.S. and China trade war. And then the market has been a little bit disappointed. So I think their meeting today, tomorrow, are very important. And hopefully they can discuss not only trade matters, but also exchange rate, how it can be market-oriented, and also capital inflow and outflow can be gradually liberalized.
Michio, it seems almost that trade will be hogging, the limelight at the G20. But what are some of the other major issues, we can expect to be brought up at the summit?
Well, other important issues at the summit, they're expected to be the global economy, trade, and investment. And that's to reaffirm the importance of leading global economic growth by addressing major risks and use policy tools towards the realization of an inclusive, sustainable growth. Now, innovation is another one, with a side event on digital economy to realize a data-free flow with trust. Now, and share understanding on principles of development using artificial intelligence. Now, various groups of mayors, women workers, and academics called Think 20 have made proposals to Mr. Abe, who is the chair of the summit meeting. And Mr. Yoshino is one such leader, and he proposed reform to deal with the aging society, with which Japan can serve as an example because it is one of the world's fastest aging society. And also on infrastructure development, which Professor Yoshino thinks that many countries are interested. And so here's more from Professor Yoshino.
I was focusing on Prime Minister Abe about infrastructure investment. China is focusing on one belt and one road. But many people are only focusing on how to construct roads, railways. But most important thing for infrastructure is how much it can develop each region and how much it can mitigate income disparities, how much it can encourage female participation into the labor market.
Well, there are many issues that the summit meeting will be discussing. Some are grilling issues, the environment, especially plastic waste, which many countries are called for to do something about the mounting plastic waste. Inequalities is one. Of course, Iran, the situation, the tension in the Middle East, and also the Korean Peninsula is also an issue of interest. So we'll see what happens during the next 2 days here in Osaka.
All right, thanks, Michio, for that preview of the G20 summit in Osaka.